First of all, the All-Star Game itself. I tend to agree with what Jaylen Brown said after the game, which is that was not basketball. That was a glorified layup line. I tend to agree with Michael Malone, who said that was the worst basketball game ever played. Maybe a little harsh, but I tend to agree with it. I feel for the fans who want to see a show, but also want to see guys compete. I'm not sure in its current form that All-Star Weekend is set up to have a competitive game.
So I wanted to ask you about this. Nate Jones, our friend Nate Jones, had a big Twitter thread about this today. You've been through All-Star Weekend a bunch. You've done 3-point. You've just been there. I don't know how many years, but you've been there a lot. It is a zoo. There are the players who are there, who are, whether they're competing in the game or just competing in any of the competitions, are going from party to party, event to event, brand thing to brand thing, over and over again. So there's no functional way that you were going to be in a basketball playing rhythm, forgetting a 100% competitive game, even like a 50% game on Sunday night when you think about what you're doing the whole time. So what exactly, in your opinion, is the fix to this, or is there a fix with the way everything is set up?
My experience, I did the All-Star Weekend 2 years. I was not an All-Star. All I did was compete in the 3-point contest on Saturday. Got out of there Sunday morning, both times. It was nonstop all day long. You obviously have appearances. There's community events that every player that participates in All-Star Weekend has to do. Some sort of NBA Cares event. So you're traveling all around. You're constantly moving from one venue to another. But the game itself, it's a fucking spectacle, dude. Like, we've got to, by the way, I love the draft right before the game, but you've got the draft right before the game. Then there's a Post Malone concert. like it's not meant to be competitive.
No.
All right. There's no, I to follow up on Nate's thing, and there's some guys that go out and party night before a game and go play. But how All-Star Weekend is set up, how the day of the game is set up, how the pregame is set up. I mean, these guys I was watching the pregame show. There's guys out there doing their shooting 2 hours before tip-off. I don't know of a single All-Star that does that. Most guys shoot 60 on the clock. Luka comes out at 50 on the clock. Joel comes out at 50 on the game preparation to get yourself in a place to compete does not exist at All-Star Weekend. Doesn't exist. And the idea that we are supposed to watch LeBron and Giannis try to crack jokes for what seemed like 35 minutes and then watch a Post Malone concert and then expect these guys to go out at full tilt, it never has been realistic, and it's not realistic with the way it's set up now. It's just not realistic. I feel for the fans. I don't know what the solution is. I think what fans want is what Tim Hardaway Jr. and Deion Waiters gave us a few years in the Rising Star game. What fans want is a little bit harder than what Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum did in the third, because they were still moving at about 60% when they were going one-on-one. But fans want to see that, and I get that. And there was none of that. Zero resistance. And it's just it wasn't even remotely fun to watch.
Well, why do you think in 2020, it was 2020, a couple of years ago, there's been 1 year in the last 10 years of this has basically been the same story, but there was 1 year where the game went down to the wire and it felt like we got that. And I don't remember all the specifics of that particular game, but clearly there's a possibility that this can happen. I don't know how much you remember about that particular game either, but why did that one work and these other ones have, this was the same story last year, what we just went through.
Yeah. I don't think it was anything specific about that game. I think it just ends up it wasn't the guys are really trying to, last night, there's a charity incentive tied to each quarter. I don't think anybody cared on the court. And that's not a knock on those guys. That's the furthest thing from their mind. It's funny. We did Islands in the League. We put a bunch of videos on social when I did my All-Star rant and how I think there should be 15 selections per conference, or just choose the 30 best players and No alternates. Just get the 30 best guys in. Statistically, it makes sense given the history of the league. Less than 5% of players make All-Star games now. Even if we went to 30 total players, it's right in line with where we were in 2011 in terms of players in the All-Star game versus total players. A common response, Tommy, that we had on our YouTube thread, on social media, a common response was there wouldn't be enough playing time. And every time I read that comment, I LOL'd. Last night was a great example of why. Jokic doesn't want to play in the All-Star game. He said it afterwards.
Yeah, he said it. He literally said it.
They asked Jimmy about not making the All-Star. He's like, it's fine. Like, what is important is the recognition of becoming an All-Star.
Yeah.
And then in this rings culture we live in, trying to get a championship. That's what's important. I'm sorry, but that's the priority. Now, that's not to say that guys are not appreciative of the fans and everybody that comes to All-Star Weekend and the spectacle that is All-Star Weekend. That's not to say they don't take it seriously, the responsibility of being named an All-Star and what that means for their career. I talked about that in Islands of the League. But the game itself is not important. It's just not important.
Well, I think
nobody cares if they play 35 minutes versus 8 minutes. Jimmy Butler, the last 2 times he's been an All-Star, has been like, I'm good. I got a couple runs. I'm good. We're
gonna get to the dunks in a second, but it feels like the whole weekend is losing. I mean, the skills competition, it doesn't feel like it needs to exist anymore. What is the thing you've always wanted to see? That my thing is horse. But what is the thing you've always wanted to see on Saturday night that doesn't exist? Because I think the skills comp, they're not going to necessarily get rid of it next year, but there's no one who's like, oh my God, that was great. I can't wait for the skills competition next year. There's no buzz about it.
The one-on-one competition. But here's the reason. Here's the thing. I was probably somewhat aware of this as a player over the last 10 years, but I'm almost positive every player in today's generation is aware of this. Like, everything is memed, everything is GIFed, everything goes on House of Highlights, everything goes on ESPN, NBA, everything just lives on, it seems, YouTube, whatever, forever. Every single play, right? And so rather, again, I'm not faulting them, but I think rather than like being embarrassed because you tried to lock down LeBron one-on-one, like you're like, if I don't try, I can't fail.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, that's how we end up with a target score of 182. And I'm not knocking Jayson Tatum because he came out to play, but like, come on, the 55 points, the All-Star game record, like, can we put an asterisk next to it? Just because of how brutal that basketball game was.
People are going to be talking about that performance for years. But don't you think it's the same thing with the dunk though? I mean, this is why people were complaining, and we're going to talk about Mac in a second. People were complaining about, there's not Ja's not in it. The young Anthony Edwards is not in it. The young superstars are not in the competition. But part of that is because, why do this? And if Ja doesn't hit 350s in a row, people are going to give him shit. And you're gonna open yourself up.
I think that's some of it. I believe that I'm glad they extended the All-Star break so that guys that actually participated in All-Star weekend could get away for a few days. But I think, having done it 15 times, you get to end of January, February, you still have 25 more games in a long playoff run. Like, you want a break. And there's been times, I think Damian Lillard 1 year in 2014, I know Blake when it was in LA, when he did the dunk contest, like there's been guys that have just basically done Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. And they've all said, I'm glad I did it the one time, but holy shit, that was a bad idea. So I think some of it is that, like, you do need the mental, the physical, the emotional reset. And I think for a lot of guys, like, what's the value for a Derrick Jones Jr.? He wins the dunk contest. He's getting a deal with Puma. For a guy like Mac McClung, there's value in doing this. But what's the value for John Morant? What is it?
It's hard. There's none.
I think there's more downside than upside. Let's talk about Mac McClung real quick. First of all, Virginia guy, Gate City, Tommy. Population of about I don't even know if it's 2,000 people, but maybe 1,600 was one article I read.
Did you watch him in high school? Did you watch his mixtapes?
No, I saw. I mean, I knew who he was because of the aforementioned social media accounts like House of Highlights and Ball is Life and Overtime and all that stuff. I would say this: I'm impressed that he's become a borderline NBA player, because I thought in high school and watching him play, I was just like, he's a dunk guy. He's got crazy hops. Guy's gotten really a lot better. Was a great college player. I did one of his games this past summer when he was on the Lakers Summer League team. He's a good basketball player, man. He's a good basketball player. Besides being an incredible athlete, he's a good basketball player. And obviously, he's a two-way guy right now with the Sixers. He was the most famous person in that dunk contest, and he was an NBA player. Think about that. Think about that. If you want to watch the rest of the episode, check out The Old Man of the Three Things, available exclusively on Amazon Music.